question of the World Cup every 2 years. It's not something that will just go away like that.
I mean, I personally think it's a silly idea.
Hello and welcome to Sport Unlocked, episode 40 of the podcast, digesting the best of the week's sports news. And later on, we'll be analysing whether FIFA's biennial World Cup plans are dead. We'll be hearing from the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, as well as the CAF president, Patrice Motsepe. He's been speaking to one of our guests, Gary Al Smith, a Ghanaian broadcaster and journalist. But joining me, Rob Harris from the Associated Press, first of all as ever, are Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and Martyn Ziegler from The Times, who joined me the other week at our first live show at the Leaders Conference. You can hear the pod on this feed as normal, but now the video of it, the whole hour, is there on our YouTube page. And don't search for us on YouTube. You can find the link very easily pinned on our Twitter page, which is even easier. It's at Sport Unlocked.
Hi guys, good to see you. Good that we're on YouTube now as well. It was the platform I've been missing.
I wasn't there to join you guys, so at least have a chance to watch it back. Heard a few interesting questions from the audience. See how you guys do under the spotlight yourselves.
Yeah, we didn't quite go for a cardboard cutout.
So Rob, you had a bit of an interesting trip up to Newcastle for their first match under the new ownership.
Yeah, it was interesting encountering the party atmosphere, certainly for Newcastle fans at St James's Park on Sunday for the visit of Tottenham. And I think the thing that hit me most first, just walking through the streets, was the number of fans dressed in robes and mock Arab clothing. And it was looking pretty offensive. And that's something that has really picked up a pace during the week, isn't it? With the concerns particularly of kick it out and eventually a statement from Newcastle against it.
Also noticed there was a lot of comment from Saudi Arabia, at least on social media. And again, I don't know how much of that is, it's all anonymous, isn't it? I mean, Khalid 4782 or whatever says he's not offended by it and why it shouldn't be there. And there were similar things, but I don't know. The fact Newcastle were forced to put a statement out, even though they said they weren't offended, there must have been a reason behind it. For me, seeing people dressed up like that and sat on camels, etc., were tropes, maybe not racist, but felt kind of offensive and are offensive to some people. If you're from that part of the world or other parts of the world, that everyone sort of wears a dish dash and rides a camel.
Yeah, I mean, it seems very much out of date, the sort of thing that might have happened 30 years ago, maybe.
And can you imagine if a Premier League club had been taken over by Chinese, Nigerian businessmen, Orthodox Jews, and fans were dressing up as them? It would be seen as highly offensive cultural appropriation. So, sounds like a necessary intervention here from Newcastle. One other aspect, actually, I noticed outside St James's Park, particularly striking, there were some genuine Saudi fans out there, and as I was speaking to some of them, going by us was a Justice for Jamal billboard. It was a poster with the face of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. And next to him was Mohammed bin Salman. The Saudi Crown Prince and US intelligence have approved an operation to kill or capture Khashoggi. And Saudi Arabia denies the allegations. And it was interesting speaking to one Saudi student studying at university in Newcastle about the billboard and about Khashoggi.
I mean, obviously, when you see just now there's a Jamal Khashoggi, how does that make you feel when someone drives that by?
It's fake news. It's fake news. Believe me, we are better than you think, and that is just fake news. Yeah.
What's fake news? He was killed, or who was behind it? He was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul.
Yeah.
They've never had his body.
I know this. I know the story. It's not like you think. It's a different story. Actually, it's really different story. Yeah.
What is the story? If you educate me from your point of view.
Hard to explain, but if you really interested, you can find the truth.
I mean, obviously, a lot of people are saying this deal shouldn't go ahead. Saudi Arabia shouldn't control it because of your country's human rights abuses, the killing of Khashoggi.
Yeah, it's a fake news, and the social media and the media also attack us about something. I don't know why, but we're really better than this. and it's just yeah, that's it. And if you're really interested, just visit Saudi Arabia, ask the people there. You will find the truth. You will find the truth.
We do ask to speak, and
you just go there and ask them. You will find the truth. Yeah.
And what do you hope for Newcastle United? What can Newcastle United do for Saudi Arabia? How can it help Saudi Arabia?
It don't help Saudi Arabia. We don't need help from anyone. Newcastle is just like make money and increase the club there.
Well, I did say in one of those questions that Newcastle is controlled by Saudi Arabia. The Premier League insists it has legally binding guarantees the kingdom is not in control of the club. The club, though, is owned now 80% of it by the Public Investment Fund, which has a board featuring a chairman, Mohammed bin Salman, 6 government ministers, an advisor to the Royal Court, and the governor, who likes to be known as His Excellency Yasser Al-Rumayyan, who is now the non-executive chairman of Newcastle United. And all those questions about is Saudi Arabia in control of the club were brought into sharper focus this week when the Saudi finance minister, Mohammed Abdullah Al-Jaddan, spoke to CNBC about the club, calling them we. And what he was particularly reacting to was this emergency Premier League meeting at the start of this week by the clubs, which saw 18 of them vote in favour of a temporary rule to block any club striking related party transaction deals, so effectively stopping Newcastle striking sponsorships with companies linked to PIF or part of PIF. We've seen it, of course, before at Manchester City, getting so many sponsors from Abu Dhabi. They insist at fair market value, but you can see the concern of Premier League rivals of Newcastle now acting to stop them trying to boost their revenue, which should, of course, help them comply with Premier League financial fair play rules, which allow you to make £105 million of losses over 3 years. 18 of the clubs voted in favour, Newcastle against, Manchester City abstained. And this is how that exchange unfolded on CNBC with the Saudi finance minister, Mohammed Abdullah Al-Jaddan. He, of course, is on the board of PIF as well.
There has been the suggestion raised that there are new rules within these clubs that essentially mean that the state can't sponsor big ticket clubs. For example, Vision 2030 is not allowed to sponsor the team. There's been a suggestion that Saudi Airlines would be able to do that, Saudia. Is that going to happen? Because it does seem as if Saudi Arabia is putting all of its might behind this investment. No?
I think, again, as I said, this is one investment among so many. I don't know the technicalities, obviously, of the association in the UK. But I would say that, if people are worried about competition amongst clubs, and particularly now that we have invested in one of them, possibly that's a good sign that there is a potential serious competitor coming their way, which is good for the whole football community. So it's good.
So we heard him talking about Newcastle as we. Doesn't necessarily mean they're controlling the club, but it does link it back to the ownership, which certainly PIF want to insist it's a PIF ownership, not Saudi ownership.
This idea of 7 degrees of separation from PIF and the Saudi state, I think it just blew that out the water as far as I was concerned. I mean, for example, it's like Vladimir Putin talking about Abramovich's takeover. To me, it just highlights actually that these divisions, so-called divisions and separations, are very absolutely meaningless.
Now, once you have the finance minister making clear reference to a we, and that essentially is the Saudi state, do you anticipate the Premier League is going to look into this, into their legally binding assurances, or are we still going to see them, or not see them in hiding?
Well, I'd be very surprised if they use that as a reason for challenging the agreement or terminating the agreement or in any way blocking the Saudis or removing people from the directorships. I do think that it may, if there's a sort of, if things happen in the future, that it may be used as a sort of part of evidence. But I think we're a long way down the road from the Premier League taking any action on that.
That's why I said it clearly. That clearly they won't investigate this. But just for a laugh, I bothered to ask them for comment on it. And funny enough, more crickets, nothing from the Premier League. I just don't anticipate that they want to do anything, and that just brings me to general point that this is a leadership, this is an organisation that is missing in action.
And the key point is the only official comment we've had on this big Premier League decision on sponsorship this week is from the Saudi finance minister. Premier League saying that there's no Saudi control of Newcastle United. So does that actually mean they can still sign up other Saudi sponsors or not? So many unanswered questions. No actual clear communication when it was an announcement from a decision from a meeting that could have been stated publicly, particularly an issue for later in the show. We've got the Premier League leading the charge against FIFA and the way they're conducting themselves over biennial World Cups. That if you adopt a high moral plane in that regard, then, well, you've got to sort of adhere to it domestically as well on your own matters. And on that meeting on Monday, you had Manchester City abstaining, Newcastle voting against, Manchester City claiming it would be a cartel, effectively, that the Premier League would be acting of to restrict sponsorship in such a way. And to me, the point is why it actually looks so pretty glaring from the other Premier League clubs is we've had a decade of this, of Manchester City striking deals from Abu Dhabi related companies, Etihad Airways sponsoring the stadium, also across the shirts. They could have decided to introduce this at any point in the last decade, or indeed in the last year, when there was the potential for this Newcastle takeover to go through, to stop a club signing sponsors linked to the ownership, which would help them effectively comply with financial fair play to raise the revenue and to comply with those 3-year allowable losses of £105 million allowed in the league.
A couple of things here. On the first point about a lack of communication, this isn't like, hey, would you like to comment on an issue that is... This is a rule change. This is a rule change. Yeah, it's going to be for 3.5 weeks until November the 11th or so, and then they may do something permanently. But it's a temporary rule change. That's just something you can press release, surely announce it, rather than have this stuff kind of leaking as usual. And to your second point, a lot of this is driven by self-interest. The other 20 or 19 clubs, they're not talking about human rights or anything like that. What most people find abhorrent about aspects of this regime. What they're concerned about is their ability to kind of destabilize the competition in a meaningful way by investing money. Now let's make that clear. And I was speaking to someone fairly senior involved with the league over the years this week, and they said, years ago they talked about potentially a rule that would prevent states from owning Premier League clubs. And it was quite funny. It didn't get very far because while it was still in the abstract, there were team owners who were like, well, what if it's us? I could make a big sale for my asset. Or if we outlaw this, the value of my club might diminish. And there's all this self-interest. Now, I mean, this is the issue that the league finds all over the place. Yes, it's a collection. It's a collection of 20 disparate parties, all competing with each other, and the hand-wringing will always be by someone who sees their own interest put under pressure. In this sense, there isn't any kind of morality here, I don't think.
No, not at all. I mean, if you look at back in 2017, I think Manchester United they agreed a quotes strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia's General Sports Authority. I think there's a picture on the club website of the managing director and probably soon to be chief executive Richard Arnold holding up a shirt next to the General Sports Authority chairman Turki Al-Sheikh, who I think you know very well, Tariq.
I followed him closely until he blocked me from his Twitter page for some reason. I don't know why. I would love to talk to him. So, Turki, if you're listening, do get in touch.
We do have a lot of listeners in Saudi Arabia, so anyone from the Crown Prince downwards wanting to come on, we've always got a spot on the pod.
But yeah, I mean, this takeover has led to quite a lot of curious contortions, really, by people supporting. I mean, there was one, today there was a column in the Daily Mail, and the headline was, "Why is Saudi money worse than cash from a bunch of white guys in America. Newcastle's owners are treated like crooks, but the Premier League's principal band don't mind rubbing along with autocratic regimes. And that's a little bit to your point. You mentioned this Saudi sponsorship of Man United. However, I think it's slightly disingenuous. Where is the line? Where is the bottom of the barrel here? And this is written by another journalist. And let's not forget, in 2018, one of our colleagues, Jamal Khashoggi, columnist Rob mentioned, working at the Washington Post, was lured to a consulate, murdered, dismembered, and his body has disappeared for good. His family have not been able to bury the body. I don't know if we can say that about the current group of Premier League owners. And this issue of race, I don't know why the idea that these American owners are white has anything to do with anything. Do we talk about religion as well, or what? It just seemed a very odd column to write under the circumstance. But this is Britain, and you're allowed to. It's a democracy. You're allowed to write any opinion you like. Now, I would like the same columnist to go to Saudi Arabia, perhaps, and write a column there that might be detrimental to the views of the Saudi regime. So see how he gets along with that.
Well, why don't we actually get a wider perspective on the Newcastle takeover as we also turn to FIFA matters as well, because joining us from Ghana is the journalist and broadcaster Gary Al-Smith. Gary, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, guys. Hi, chaps.
You're listening to some of that discussion. How's the Saudi takeover of Newcastle being viewed there? Certainly in England, a lot's focused on human rights and the role of Mohammed bin Salman and the financial disparity the takeover could create, whereas in Newcastle they're looking at hope and opportunity, a team that has not won anything since the FA Cup in 1955. What's the perspective as you've been seeing it from a bit more distance?
Well, here there isn't much in terms of such problems as you would have in England, in terms of where does the money come from. You are questioning where the money is coming from. You don't often get that here. And so obviously people understand the issues that are being articulated in England, and say, for example, the rules that the Premier League has put, the so-called fit and proper test, which these days does not seem to be very fit and proper itself. But here, like I'm saying, if you look at the Ghana Premier League and Premier Leagues or top flights around these parts, you don't have such things here, really. I mean, so long as somebody is bringing in money and is going to help the investment, and teams are going to be competitive, particularly on the continent and things like that, you don't really ask too many questions. So yes, people are interested, but that's the extent to which it's making news here.
Newcastle's, of course, challenges getting out of the relegation zone. Maybe that will impact their ability to start to get more fans around the world as well in places like Ghana. Now we turn to the big FIFA talking point of the week. Gianni Infantino hosting a FIFA council. We've also discovered audio I listened to of a bruising encounter between Gianni Infantino and UEFA members over this push for a biennial World Cup. And so many indications are now that the project has stalled. The question is the biennial World Cup plan dead?
I think it almost certainly is. I mean, I think the writing was on the wall, certainly when the IOC put out for what is for them a really hard-hitting statement. Now, it wasn't from Thomas Bach, but it was from the IOC, and it referenced sort of women's sport, Olympic sport itself, and it said that there's clearly been no contact with the actual players to find out what their views either. I think that must have really rattled Gianni Infantino and FIFA, because I did a piece last weekend saying that the CONCACAF president, Victor Montagliani, had been going around trying to find a compromise solution, perhaps something like a Global Nations League, and that, I think it's unlikely he would have done that off his own bat. I think he was probably been asked to do it by FIFA, by Infantino, because they have to try and rescue something from this. But I definitely think the biennial project is on its knees, if not dead.
Martyn, you referenced the IOC putting a statement out. Yes, and they were so furious. They put another statement out as well, just to clarify that Gianni Infantino had never discussed this idea with Thomas Bach, the IOC president. And they wanted to make that clear as well. And that just kind of shows the strength of feeling there. And again, we've been talking about self-interest with the Newcastle story and the other Premier League teams, and there is a sense that, you know, if football is trying to eat everybody else's dinner, perhaps by planting its flag, putting these tournaments all over spaces that are designed for women's sport, yes, women's football, but also other global sporting events. And, you know, Rob, you mentioned this meeting bruising meeting, I think you called it, with European FAs this week, and it certainly was. It was nation after nation spoke up. Gianni Infantino was present on the link, and one after the other, Spain, Italy, Germany, the Nordic countries. In fact, the Nordic countries essentially was veiled, or maybe not so veiled, threat that if this vote for biennial World Cup goes ahead, they may be exploring ideas that, if you read between the lines, look like perhaps even leaving FIFA at some point.
That's something I reported for AP on Tuesday, that more than a dozen European FAs had talked to UEFA about potentially quitting FIFA.
Yeah, and then there was other interesting points there. There was a Romanian FA head. He said to Gianni, made it quite personal, and he said to him, look, you know, we voted for you. We essentially picked you to be the FIFA president. We supported you in the elections for FIFA, including myself. We trusted you to sort of not make divisions, to transcend all these divisions, to create unity. Essentially saying you went in as a unity president, and you've emerged as something completely different. And that meeting ended, I think, with the UEFA president, Alexander Shefrin, saying there'd be severe consequences if a vote went ahead. And a vote that Gianni wanted on December the 20th really rushed through, where we're still at an ideas point here. You know, we don't know what the ideas are. The economic assessment, for one, hasn't even been presented yet. And it looked like into that meeting, there was more confederation presidents, CONCACAF, you mentioned Martyn. I think the Asian Confederation as well is now thinking, hang on, why are we going so fast here? So it looks like there's certainly, you know, there is not going to be a vote on December the 20th at least. And from Gianni Infantino's words, I do agree with you that I think this thing is stone dead.
Well, I did ask Gianni Infantino at the press conference during the week just whether or not he would go ahead with this biennial World Cup plan, given the strength of feeling from Europe, the opposition and threats of boycotts, and indeed whether or not he could ditch the plans based on the financial and feasibility studies.
What I can assure you is that we would go ahead only if everyone is better off. And I believe that if everyone is better off, whether it's with World Cups every 2 years, whether it's only men or only women, whether it's with something else, if everyone is better off, not only economically but also sportingly, with the participation and so on, I think that there is a chance to come to a global consensus. This is my objective. This is also my task. I'm here to unite. I'm not here to divide. It's not always easy to be president of FIFA. Especially it's not easy in this particular context where people have been given the opportunity to speak and where they speak. So the question of the World Cup every 2 years, if this is your question, is not something that will just go away like that. It's not dependent on the FIFA president. It's dependent on those who want this or something else in order to develop their game. And we all have, and there is a consensus of everyone, we all have the responsibility to work in trying to make the game better all over the world. And let's not forget as well that every sports organization has in the past taken opportunities to develop their competitions. Most of them have added games, have added hundreds of games, and that's legitimate if it's good for the game. FIFA is going through exactly this process now It was not done maybe when it should have been done. And again, it's not about the World Cup, it's about the global football ecosystem and how we can make sure that we can attract mainly our youth back into football. So I am, well, as you know me, positive by nature. I believe that we can come up with something that makes sense and something that everyone can be happy. And I understand as well all critical voices on one side as on the other side, trying to find a bridge between all these different positions is our challenge, but is also our ambition.
Gary, a lot of the conversation out of FIFA has been centered on this is Europe against FIFA's plans, it's Europe against the world. It's almost like Europe is trying to impede global growth, and the fact that actually continents like Africa are in favour of a biennial World Cup. How do you feel when you sort of hear that language, and how have you assessed how this World Cup plan has been sort of advanced?
I mean, geopolitically, and this transcends football and sport, but I mean, Africa as a continent has always argued for decades that, perhaps when it comes to these global conversations in global bodies, Africa should also look at its interest. But Africa's interest is always tapered off or tapers off because of the function of economics, because it cannot pull as much muscle as its Western brothers, whether it's Europe or North America. And that has been the thing. Patrice Motsepe, again, has articulated an idea that may be a very tantalizing carrot for the members of the Confederation of African Football. He says that, look, a biennial World Cup, for example, helps Africa because it is a shortcut to getting a bit of money more frequently. And it sort of makes sense to the African member associations because the way they get money is very different from how Europe gets its money in terms of its member associations. The state involvement is too much in Africa, and they don't have for so many reasons that we can't go into here. They are not able to fund their national teams and so on and so forth. So when Africa hears this sort of language from Europe, obviously it is understood that Europe is fighting for its own health. It's fighting for the health of its own competitions, which are very vibrant and very strong, even in Africa, such as the Champions League. The UEFA Nations League has taken off, and it's quite fun. I mean, I've seen many of you journalists even tweet and talk about it. And even in Africa, it's taking a liking here because it's quite fun. But Africa is not able to do it. So Europe is protecting its investments, its eyeballs, its babies. And who is not to understand? So, Rob, generally, the answer is simple. Africa understands that Europe is fighting for its interest. And increasingly, African administrators are thinking, hang on, how do we fight for our interests as well? And that is what it's going to boil down to.
I think that's a very fair position, actually, Gary, because you're right. UEFA is the richest by far of all the confederations. I mean, South America is pretty rich as well, but I mean, huge amounts of money. That not only with the international competitions that it has, but also with the club competition. So you can see there is definitely other parts of the world look at it and say, well, hang on, what about us? How do we develop? And that's why I think UEFA have to make some sort of compromise on this, or whether it's a global nations league or something. Then that's fair enough. I mean, I think it should. I don't know how you do it, but what you don't want it to do is for this to become a sort of way that Gianni Infantino enhances his electoral prospects for the next election or whatever, because the suspicion is that's what drives a lot of people is their own sort of interest. So if there is some way that this can be done, that the rest of the world, the smaller associations in Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, for example, the Pacific, that they can be given something which gives them a bit of a slice of the pie, then I think that's something which should definitely be looked at. And the Nations League that they have in Europe, I think we can easily lose that and it become part of a global competition.
I don't think anyone would disagree with you in terms of innovation, and no one is saying to Gianni Infantino or anyone at FIFA, guys, sit on your hands, don't do anything, don't come up with a good idea to improve football. And you're right, Martyn. It should be more than with a view to electioneering. Unfortunately, the structure of FIFA is 211 members choose a new president every 4 years, and suddenly, as your midterm, you start offering more carrots to more voters, and sometimes the ideas are perhaps not for the right reasons. But no one is saying don't come up with some really interesting, innovative plans for not just Africa, even parts of Europe, South America, Central America, Asia. Everyone can do with a boost, but is there something that can be created that isn't a massive fight and doesn't end up with Gianni, which is, has seen this before, come up with an idea, push it really publicly, and then run at 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds and go headlong, hurtling into a wall, which we have seen over and over again. There was the 2018 SoftBank debacle with the Club World Cup. That's fresh in a lot of people's memories. Then you have this. I think it's about process.
That was, of course, when he tried to railroad through a $25 billion investment package for the Club World Cup and the Global Nations League with the backing of SoftBank, tried to ambush a meeting and get them to agree it. And, of course, that rang alarm bells and UEFA opposed. One of the central components of this biennial World Cup plan is a revising of the international men's calendar that would reduce the number of international windows from the current September, October, November, March and June ones for tournaments to just October, November in a single month, and indeed June, July for tournaments every year. One of the things flagged up with that was, well, if you're limiting the qualifiers to being just in October, November, then not only does it impede the chances of teams qualifying if key players get injured, but for countries, it compacts all their games into one period. And Gary, how would that sort of seem to you, particularly when you're already used to seeing so many of the top players from Africa leaving, say, to play in Europe, and your chance to watch them on home soil is during qualifiers, and suddenly that would be reduced to a tiny part of the year?
It's not just an African thing, but it's global, because lots of continents and confederations have their best players increasingly coming to or being hoovered by the top 6, the top 10 European nations and their domestic leagues and so on. And so it's always going to be a problem. Look, increasingly it's split. The views are split in my interactions with top African football players on the need for certain international tournaments and international football. Some definitely think that international friendlies are a waste of time, and so they'll be more than happy to collapse it because they want to operate on the higher level. But guess what? Increasingly, as the rules are changing, particularly in Europe because of the coming of Brexit and what it's done to the entire EU structure and immigration becoming a different issue, more players, guys, do not seem to need national teams like they used to. Remember the days when before you went into a top 4 or a top 6 European nation club or something, you needed to have a certain quota of national team football. Remember those days? Yeah. Now it's no more the case anymore because, for example, with the coming of Brexit, the Great Britain, or certainly England, have loosened the rules a bit in order to get more quality players in there without going through all those hoops. The direct effect of that on African nations is that, guess what? Now, players who would have been begging to be playing for their national teams suddenly don't see the need anymore. An example is Mohamed Salisu at Southampton. If it was only 4 years ago, I guarantee you guys, he would have been the first on the plane to come and play for the national team. Now, I mean, his quality is there for everybody to see. Ghana has basically asked him about 3 or 4 times, are you coming? And he's saying that, wait, let me cement my club football career first. That would have been unthinkable 3 or 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, because then he would have needed all those pointers to keep cementing his place for Southampton, and also to angle for a move next season when he's got good football for Southampton and a Liverpool or a Real Madrid or a Bayern Munich or something want to come for him. So, these are the conversations we don't see when these big decisions are being taken, because that is how it trickles down to the everyday football, and it waters down the quality for the African qualifiers, for example. And there are so many players around the continent. Look at Algeria. There's a guy called Andy Delort. Now, Andy Delort is an interesting footballer, guys. He was eligible for Algeria and also for France, and I think one other nation. Algeria kept asking him, do you want to play? Do you want to play? He wouldn't bother. He wouldn't care. He played for France's under under 17 and under 20 or so youth teams. Just when Algeria were starting to get ahead of steam and he saw that, well, hang on, they do have quite a good team, don't they? And they were on a roll. And just before the Africa Cup of Nations in 2019, Andy Delors suddenly says he's available for Algeria. And of course, Algeria go on to win the Africa Cup of Nations, and he has an Africa Cup of Nations trophy in his cabinet. Now, guess what? In the last month, this guy, because they are qualifiers and he has to be traveling in and out of the continent, he says that he wants to go for a 1-year international break. And of course, that 1-year international break will be done, guess what? Very, very handily around next year, September, October, when Algeria more likely than not would have qualified for Qatar. And he's going to come out of his international break. So these are the direct implications of FIFA playing hopscotch and, playing chess with these things. It messes with the loyalties of players, makes it easier for them to cherry pick, and obviously waters down the quality that continent like Africa can pose when it comes to international tournaments.
And you are facing the same old sort of arguments we're going to get in the end of December about players going off, leaving their European clubs to go and play in the African nations.
Yeah, so there's that one too, of course. I mean, there's a meme on Twitter that started about a couple of days ago saying that this is what Liverpool's front three is going to be like in January. And then there's a chicken, there's a hen, and then there's a rooster because of course Mo Salah and Sadio Mane are not going to be around, and maybe Naby Keita is also not going to be around.
Of course, Liverpool did know when they signed the players that they would have African nations duties at some point. I do just want to turn to one of the comments Gianni Infantino made during his FIFA press conference this week when actually discussing Africa and bringing World Cups to the continent, and something struck me in his tone and portrayal of why Africa needs World Cups effectively, so the world doesn't have to look at Africa negatively.
It would have bring the opportunity to present Africa to the world in a new way, not for any sort of tragic news or bad news or news that people have to feel sad about, or for some charity questions, but for some real top professional activities that can, of course, be carried out in Africa as well as in other parts of the world.
Gary, how did that make you feel when you heard that?
Well, it's not new to anybody who follows, African football. Look, all these guys, and I'm sure if you take a trip around all the confederations and journalists who cover them, they're going to tell you that these FIFA presidents say what they think we want to hear or what is going to make them popular. And it's a bit cringe, if I'd say, but it's not surprising. It's not surprising at all. It's not surprising at all.
Gary, how is the scene there? How is the continental scene? FIFA essentially seems to have taken over African football has it improved under this FIFA guidance?
No.
Why not?
And somebody would say, why would you say no? No matter who is in charge, you want to see an improvement in certain basic things. You want to see across-board sponsorships coming in that will trickle down to the clubs. That isn't coming in. That will not come anytime soon because the investment climate for the Confederation of African Football by itself, without even FIFA's meddling, is not very attractive to sponsors because of years of mismanagement and things like that. A lot of corporates don't want to touch it, and those who touch it probably did not sign contracts that would have necessarily inured to the 54 odd member associations here. You wanted to, apart from sponsorship, you wanted to see things like infrastructure, right, being built across board. But you are not getting that in this recently new administration. or the one that has just gone, where Ahmad was president of the Confederation of African Football. But yesterday, Patrice Motsepe, the CAF president and South African billionaire, who doubles as a owner of the Mamelodi Sundowns Football Club in South Africa, or the founder, more accurately, was asked by one of the journalists here, point blank and in the face, "Are you a puppet, basically, of Gianni Infantino?" Could you imagine the scenes? And and he said, I mean, I'm sure it's not the first time he's heard it in a presser or something, but this was quite direct. And he said, "Let me get this out of the way. I don't need anybody's money." And he started trotting off the sort of, financial muscle that his family do for even charity, mentioning how they've put $500 million, and he was kind enough to let us know that the dollars was United States, not probably Liberian dollars, um, you know, into donations, and he reeled off about $20 million, I think, in projects around African football, grassroots, this, that. So he helpfully let us know that money is not a problem. Money is not a problem. And so
Did you feel convinced?
by that answer, he was just trying to say that. And then he went on to also mention that a couple of heads of states who are his friends have also heard the rumors that he and by extension CAF are being controlled by FIFA. And they've expressed surprise because they know that he, Patrice Motsepe, cannot be controlled. And what he will tell us is that Patrice can only be controlled by Africans and African football fans and not anybody from elsewhere. So, well, that was his answer. Was I convinced? Well, I was there to ask questions and he was there to answer, and his answer sounded convincing. But as a journalist, if we, Martyn, Ziegler, we know what you do in your work. Rob Harris, we know how of a mastiff you can be as well, when you want your answers. And so if I were swayed by what administrators say, I wouldn't qualify to be in this job. So I listened to him, I heard his answer, but of course I'm not convinced because we know what we know. So yeah.
Patrice Motsepe, 6 months into the presidency of CAF now.
Yes, he is. He spent a lot of time. Yesterday, he also, he likes to name drop a lot when he's having his speeches. So he let us know helpfully that in the time he's been in office, he's been on official tours to about 20 countries already. And I'm like, yay. So yeah,
It's one. I suppose, Gary. It's one thing saying whether you're controlled directly or not, but if you have been put into your position with the help of FIFA, then obviously you feel that you have to return the favour. And I suppose a lot of people may think that the CAF's position on a 2 yearly World Cup is repaying that favour. What do you think about that?
you can say what you want about Issa Hayatou. That man, stuck to his guns from minute one till whenever it is that he left the job. On those matters, it was non-negotiable that the Africa Cup of Nations was going to be in January. And that is why he was loved here. He would not have agreed to a biennial World Cup for anything.
And of course, you did get to challenge Patrice Motsepe, the CAF president, this week during his visit to the Ghana Football Association. Let's take a listen to Gary's exchange with Patrice Motsepe on the push for biennial World Cups from FIFA.
Currently, as you know, even the best African football players in the world are doing well, but they are complaining about a congested fixture schedule. And even as of now, they are literally begging, their bodies are begging for some rest. I was saying a couple of weeks ago that if you take our top 5 players like Mo Salah, Sadio Mane, Riyad Mahrez, and others, they've not had a proper rest in 4 years. And if things go the way they are, for another 3 years, they will not rest. So my simple question is this. If you support a biennial World Cup when we already have a 2-year Africa Cup of Nations, where, as CAF president, do you want us to place it in the calendar?
You are asking, and if you've got a radio station, I want to listen to it. If you've got it, Is that so? I'm going to listen to it all over the continent. Now, let me tell you a very brilliant question. You know Arsene Wenger. Arsene Wenger is advising us on this process of the World Cup every 2 years. And part of that process involves a review of the football calendars and to ensure that the players actually play less football and not more. They play less football. So there's discussions taking place, and Arsene Wenger has made a lot of presentations to us, and there's a study that's being conducted by FIFA, and I can assure you, because we have a duty to come and talk to the presidents of the member associations of CAF, and the president of Ghana is not just president of Ghana. They've shown confidence in his exceptional leadership. He's president of the regional football, WAFU. WAFU B. Yeah. He's the president of WAFU B because all of the countries neighboring have shown confidence in him. Said, but he's a special leader. We've got confidence in him, and that's why I also want him in CAF, because I want the best in CAF. So we will. I mean, those questions you're asking, absolutely legitimate, and we'll come back, because we've got to report, we've got to account, and we've got to show you why the World Cup every 2 years is highly beneficial for the players, for football in the world, and of course, as I said, for us in Africa, it is highly beneficial to us as well.
Gary, what did you make of his answer?
We know Patrice Motsepe. I mean, for those who have not had a close-up shot of him, these past few months I've been interested in watching him, because he absolutely almost never answers a question directly. When you ask him a question, he's just going to vacillate, waffle, put a lot of words together, but he almost never is going to give you an answer. But on this one, I tried to pin him down, and I asked him directly, what is your plan as CAF president for the timing of the Africa Cup of Nations, which is also every 2 years? If you want the World Cup to be every 2 years, what is your plan? And he said, guess what? That Arsene Wenger, who is in Europe, is thinking about it and having some research. And so, like you heard in the tape, he will let us know when the research is done. Then we can decide the time. Imagine the UEFA president saying that somebody in FIFA is going to have a bit of research, and then after that, UEFA can't decide when to hold the Euros.
Well, Gary, it's been great to have you on from Ghana. As we close up this week's episode, let's go around. Do we think biennial World Cups will happen?
No, I don't think so. I think now, yeah, Europe. Thank you, Europe. Yeah, Europe. Europe is doing the Lord's work for us. And I mean, I personally think it's a silly idea. For purely sentimental, puritanical reasons, yes, as a purist or whatever it is, I think 4 years, the allure and the appeal of the 4-year thing should be kept. And that's it for me. Yeah.
Yeah, you put it perfectly. As far as I'm concerned, Gary, I share these exact feelings.
Absolutely not, is what I say. Hostage to fortune, come and get me.
Well, the great thing about this pod has been, through the year we've been doing it, is we've managed to cover the genesis of so many ideas and then their demise, like the Super League, although they are trying to revive the Super League plans. And again, the process and perhaps the mess up of the strategy has been exposed again in these biennial World Cup plans. Gary, thank you so much for all your insight. Gary Al Smith.
Gary, thanks for joining, and particularly the insight from what it's like on the ground and the stuff about the qualifiers. And I remember in South America as well, there's something similar where players would try and get capped in order to get transferred. And you sometimes forget, for a lot of people, this is a business. And perhaps FIFA's job is to make it less of a business and to make it more accessible to more parts of the world.
One place we're often looking at for FIFA to take new competitions in the past was China. The IOC has encountered many challenges heading its way over human rights concerns over the Winter Olympics being there in Beijing in 2022. Now this is a challenge facing the NBA after the Boston Celtics player Enes Kanter posted a video attacking the brutal dictator of China, Xi Jinping. I have a message for you and your henchmen. In it, he said, under your Chinese government's brutal rule, Tibetan people's basic rights and freedoms are non-existent. The area of Tibet, not one often focused on in sport, but this has enraged China, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The CCTV, which is the state television, has pulled not just the Boston Celtic matches, but actually they've pulled the whole of the NBA. And I think the NBA expecting that this blackout is going to be affecting them for the rest of the year. A similar sort of thing happened previously, didn't it? With some tweets about Hong Kong from Daryl Morey, who was one of the Houston Rockets executives back in 2019. So we've been here before. But it's a really big deal for the NBA because China is one of their major markets. And actually, it's quite an interesting thing, I think, in terms of with the Beijing Olympics coming up. What if we start seeing Olympic athletes speaking out? Because that's going to be a massive challenge for the IOC and for China.
Yeah, I think we're in an era of athlete activism, and Enes Kanter is no stranger to speaking up. He's already, I suppose, an enemy of the state of the country he's born in, Turkey. He's been critical of President Erdogan there, had his passport cancelled because he's been accused of having links to a banned preacher, which he denies. He has been a vocal opponent of President Erdogan there. And again, with China, it's not the first time they've done this. Like you said, there's also the case of Mesut Ozil when he was at Arsenal. He spoke up about the Uyghur minorities, and almost overnight, he became an unperson in China. He disappeared. Arsenal and the Premier League briefly disappeared, but Ozil has pretty much been deleted, erased from China. And the same thing looks like it's happening with Kanter. So there was some reports that said that if you try to look up his name, the Chinese version of his name, on the search platforms in China, nothing really comes up. He's and like you said, his team, the Boston Celtics, disappeared as well. But the thing is, sometimes you might have to stand up for something, and if you don't get those Chinese eyeballs, maybe that's the cost. I guess there's going to be. We talked about earlier with Newcastle. I suppose there is a line somewhere that some people are going to have to take. What is it that you won't be willing to tolerate?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Rob. I mean, sooner or later there's going to be a really big challenge, and I think it could happen with somebody. Just if somebody speaks out really strongly ahead of the Olympics, it'll be a really interesting test of how the authorities react, because it's there's going to be so much at stake, isn't there? Interesting one.
The whole of the UK sport seems to have resigned in the last day or two, Zeke, no?
Yeah, there's been. I mean, this has been coming. I sort of wrote about it in my column a week ago that the chief executive of UK Athletics was under big pressure. Joe Coates. They had a terrible Olympics. Not only did they mess up in terms of their medals, their top athletes that turned up injured, and then there was a really embarrassing drugs test failure by CJ Uja, one of the sprinters. So it's been an absolute disaster. There's been a new chairman just taken over in BT. And this week we found finally Joe Coates stepped down, and there is going to be a new chief executive of UK Athletics who we don't know yet, but wouldn't be surprised if it's somebody who worked with in BT previously at Scottish Athletics.
Great to speak to you as ever, guys. Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, Gary Al Smith from Ghana earlier. I'm Rob Harris, and whatever sport you're watching in the days ahead, I hope it's enjoyable. For now, if you've got any questions, message us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and we'll speak to you soon. Goodbye for now.